Welcome to Women's Sports Weekly, where women's sports happens every day, but we talk about it once a week. I'm Danielle.
And I'm Carolyn. Women's Sports Weekly is a podcast where we discuss the latest news, explore interesting stories, and share our love for women's sports. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Women's Sports Weekly Pod. Follow us and rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
We had a packed weekend, which I also feel like is a theme on this podcast, but a very fun weekend. If you are in Denver and you have never been to Tracks on First Friday, I would recommend checking it out. It was very fun. We had been to Tracks a few years ago during Pride weekend, but we kept being told like it's not the same during Pride weekend than other weekends. And Tracks is a LGBTQ plus club in Denver. On first Friday of the month, they do ladies night, and we were surrounded by queer women, which was awesome. The DJ was great. We got to dance a lot. It was a lot of fun.
We successfully this past weekend stayed out till 2 a.m. both nights. Normally during the week and on the weekends as well, we are in bed by 8:30 p.m.
Yes, we are. We are old women, but we rallied this weekend. On Saturday night, I had a holiday party for my work, so we went to that and stayed out with coworkers after the party. And then even Sunday, we had a marathon of a day. Got to see a lot of friends this weekend, and that is always so great. So grateful for that. And
on Sunday, we got to go to our new favorite bar.
The 99ers Sports Bar is officially open in Denver. We've talked about them before. If you have not listened to episode 45 yet, would definitely recommend, because we interviewed the owners of the 99ers, Miranda and Annie, during that episode. They shared more about why they opened the bar and how the bar idea came to fruition. And now the bar is open. So it's a great time to listen to episode 45 if you haven't. If you are in Denver, get your butt to that bar as soon as possible.
If you're visiting Denver, go support. It is in a great location. The bar is perfect and has great beers on tap. What was your initial impression when you walked in?
Just loved how many people were in there, the excitement around it, all the TVs with women's games on it. So vibes were high. I was just very excited, impressed with the decor and the signed jerseys. Everything really came together, I thought. How about you?
Yeah, I felt the same way. I felt like we stepped in and everyone was just so excited to be there. Annie and Miranda were so excited to have people in there. The staff were super welcoming, and everyone was just so genuinely happy to be in a place like the 99ers, like these sports bars that are popping up that are dedicated to women's sports. It is so nice to have.
Yes. And I also think it's important to point out there are people who do not like to drink alcohol, and I appreciate that they have a lot of non-alcoholic options. So if you are someone who does not drink, but it is a place you want to check out, there will be options. And I think that's really important too. Part of what we had talked about on the interview with them a few episodes back was wanting to make people feel included in that space. And I think from what I saw, they're doing a great job. And I know you and I are going to be regulars there. So excited to get back and watch all the games.
Yeah. And it's just really nice to support a local business that you feel passionate about. It's really, really nice to have. I feel, although we had nothing to do with it, I just feel so proud of the city. I feel really proud of Annie and Miranda for doing this. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so just very cool to see and be part of and get to witness it.
And Denver has been needing this.
Yes.
Denver's such a great city for this, and just really excited to see how it progresses and the journey of the bar. Now that they're open, it's definitely going to be fun to continue to go and experience that.
And they have the best merch around. So if you watched episode 45, you saw that they had special limited hats, and we did end up getting them, which was very exciting. I didn't have to get in a fight with anyone to get them either, which was also a huge plus because they're limited supply. We were able to get a hat. All of their hats, all of their t-shirts. I just love the 99ers logo and their gear. And so if you go and you're visiting, or if you're from Denver, make sure you pick up some gear too. Let's keep supporting them.
I'm very grateful you didn't need to fight anyone, because I did not have the energy by the time it was Sunday to deal with that. So I'm very happy you were able to get that hat without any fights.
Yeah, and they didn't have to throw anyone out on their second day open, which I think is a real positive for them.
For sure. So outside of our busy weekend, this week has been jam-packed with So many good games. I think we should dive right into the highlight reel.
Yes, let's talk about NCAA women's basketball. This past week was the ACC SEC Challenge, the Atlantic Coast Conference versus the Southeastern Conference. But don't let those names fool you, because we are going to talk about the Notre Dame versus Texas game and the LSU versus Stanford game. Texas is somehow in the Southeastern Conference, the SEC, and Stanford is somehow in the ACC. Just wild to me. I'll never get over it. I sound like a boomer, but here we are. I guess things change and I just need to adapt. But let's get into the Notre Dame versus Texas. When they played, Notre Dame was ranked 10, Texas was ranked 4, and Notre Dame wins in overtime 80-70.
I talked about this game last week as my looking ahead, and wow, it served. Players were fired up. It was super exciting. So many highlights during that game. Hannah Hidalgo was a highlight reel in her own play. Between her, Olivia Miles, and we can dive more into what some of those plays looked like. So Rory Harmon on Texas and Hannah Hidalgo on Notre Dame are both so good on defense.
The backcourts on both Notre Dame and Texas are incredibly impressive. I'm impressed by this Texas team. I know that they lost here. I think Notre Dame is really solid. I know that they have a loss to Utah and to TCU, but I thought these were two very evenly matched teams. And the way that both Rory Harmon and Hannah Hidalgo play, it was so fun to see that matchup and see them go head to head.
Hannah's always all over the place on defense, and I had mentioned there were a lot of highlights during this game. Hannah poked the ball out of Rory Harmon's hands, dove on the floor to secure the ball. She sees in the corner of her eye Olivia Miles taking off down the court.
I don't even know if she really saw it. I think she was just a prayer.
I don't know. And she took both hands. She was on her butt at this point and just chucked the ball behind her for Olivia Miles to have a nice open layup down the court. It was truly just so much fun to watch. I was going nuts this entire game.
You were clapping and screaming very loudly.
I was.
And I was not ready for it. I was not ready for this level of fandom for Notre Dame. And I know you love Notre Dame, but it was alarming to me how loud you were.
You act surprised. You've been with me when Notre Dame won the national championship in 2018.
It's true.
And how crazed I was there. And every time they played, for some reason, you were caught off guard.
I know. We're attached to another house. We live in a duplex, and I was seriously worried that our neighbors were going to come over and be like, is everything okay over here? And I would just have to explain that, like, no, Notre Dame is just on TV.
I mean, they've heard me yelling during games plenty times before. I think they expect it now.
Before we get into the Notre Dame players and their win, we need to talk about Madison Booker on Texas. She is a sophomore. She is, I'm going to say someone else later in this episode is one of the best players in the NCAA. Madison Booker is one of the best players in the NCAA. Her transition from freshman to sophomore year, her body looks completely different. She's definitely put on more muscle. She had 20 points and 8 rebounds, 5 assists in this game. I was just so super impressed by her the entire time we were watching. And I was like, whoa, this Texas team is good. They got beat by Notre Dame, but man, they can put something together. And they're well coached.
And don't forget, Texas went really far in the tournament last year, and Madison Booker, as a freshman, had an unbelievable season. And to your point, as a sophomore, you could just tell the growth in 1 year. The announcers said multiple times, if she was going to the draft this year, she would be the second overall pick. Like, yes. They said that multiple times.
They were saying that, but I was like, the sophomore class is just
insane.
Stacked. If every sophomore was going into the draft, no, she probably wouldn't be the second round pick because you have Juju Watkins and all of that to compete with. But she is so good.
Yes. So the game remains pretty close throughout the entire thing. Notre Dame did lead as much as 9 points in the third quarter, but Texas was able to come back. They led the game twice in the fourth quarter. Mm-hmm. So it was truly back and forth. I was on the edge of my seat, very excited, very nervous. The final 10 seconds of regulation were absolutely wild. I just couldn't believe what was happening. Rory Harmon hit a contested jumper to tie the game. Then Notre Dame gets the ball. Olivia Miles goes down the court. Olivia Miles, the way she goes in for a layup with one hand, she does this a lot. just so athletic, and to be able to do that, I just don't understand. She makes a ridiculous layup, and there were only a few seconds on the clock, and somehow Notre Dame fouls Rory Harmon in the backcourt. I don't even know how they fouled her. And what happens? Rory Harmon makes not one, but both foul shots in the final seconds to tie the game again. Talk about ice in the veins. Could you imagine being in that position? Basically, you have no time on the clock. You're down 2 and you need to hit 2 free throws.
I would shit myself, and she just looked very composed.
So composed. And it wasn't even a matter of the ball almost falling out of the basket. Like 2 swishes, tie game, and they go into overtime.
And it's so interesting with foul shots that you can just see it on a person's face. You know if they're going to make it or not. And she was locked in.
Oh, yeah.
And you knew those shots were going in.
And this game was at Notre Dame, so that's an added component. Like, you're not home and you're just able to do that. I personally was very nervous with them going into overtime because I myself have been very upset watching my teams lose in overtime games. So I was just like, had a bad feeling.
Well, and we have a theory too that overtime usually is to the benefit of the higher seed. And in this case, Texas was ranked higher than Notre Dame, but Notre Dame took it over.
They did. They ended up winning 80-70, so it was a 10-point game. Hannah Hidalgo had 30 points and 8 rebounds. 19 of those points were in the first half. She was on fire. Sonia Citron and Olivia Miles both added 18 points each. What I said after the game is I thought it was an instant classic. I know I'm biased to Notre Dame, but it was unreal. And this was the first loss for Texas. A lot of teams this year are like 6-0, 8-0, 7-0, whatever. And now Texas has a loss. It's fun to watch these games and to watch teams battle so early in the season. Just to have so much excitement this early on is great.
The parity this year, I think, is different than any other year that we've watched.
It continues to be that way every year.
It just gets higher and higher.
Yep.
Every other team is getting better and better and better. And we're just going to have more upsets. We're going to have more close games, which is really fun as a viewer. The other game we wanted to talk about was the LSU, who was ranked number 5, versus Stanford, who was unranked at the time that they were playing. And LSU beat Stanford 94-88 in overtime. However, this was not LSU's game by any means. And they were playing at LSU.
This was one of the most insane comebacks I think I've ever seen in my life. With a few minutes left, I for sure thought Stanford was going to win that game.
Well, people were leaving.
And so did the crowd.
Yes.
The announcers were saying, and this was at LSU, well, the crowd is starting to exit the building. Yes. And slowly after that, LSU started making things happen and the crowd starts funneling back in. I would have been really pissed if I was there and left and missed what happened next.
So for some context, LSU only led in regulation for a total of 15 seconds. They were down this entire game. So they weren't playing their best game. They're in front of a home crowd. With 40 seconds remaining, Stanford had a 6-point lead. They were up 78-72. So the people in the crowd were like, we're out. Afterwards, Kim Mulkey in the press conference was like, I've got names of the people who were leaving. I'm going to talk to them in church, which is the most Kim Mulkey thing you can say. I just said Madison Booker is one of the best players in NCAA basketball. Michaela Williams for LSU is also one of the best players in college basketball right now.
She is scary good.
Another sophomore who finished with 32 points and 9 rebounds. With 4 seconds left in the game, she sank a turnaround jumper to force overtime. Before that, she had a jumper that was an and one that cut the lead to 3. She was instrumental in this win.
Oh yeah, she was definitely the reason that they were able to even push this game into overtime.
Yes. I don't know why they weren't beating Stanford, but it was a fun game to watch. I feel like LSU historically is a little bit up and down, and they find their stride towards the end of the season. But a win like this, a comeback win, I think is really important and can show the resilience of a team and hopefully propel them in the future. But you need to watch LSU. One for Kim Mulkey, who's just doing antics on the sidelines that are just so worth watching, throwing her hands up in the air, punching the air like she's going to hit a referee.
Yes.
It is very entertaining. And then you have people like Flau'jae Johnson on the team, who is so incredibly fun to watch. And Michaela Williams, like I said, also amazing. Also Anissa Morrow on LSU. Yep. Just so many players worth watching, worth taking the time, and they come out with the win in overtime. Once they hit overtime, it was all LSU, and they beat them 94-88.
definitely another instant classic ending of the game.
What does an instant classic mean?
That's just going to be a game that's a classic that people are going to go back and watch. I think Notre Dame, Texas more so just because that whole game. But the ending, like I said, I don't think I've ever seen such a good comeback in my life. The way LSU was able to push that game into overtime, I'm still mind boggled by that.
And then still in NCAA basketball, this past Sunday, South Carolina took on TCU. South Carolina was ranked number 3 at the time. They're taking on a top 10 team and number 9 TCU. And I was nervous for this game, but it was a complete blowout.
And I said to you, Carolyn, please do not tell me you are nervous for this game. That is ridiculous.
But Notre Dame is a great team. Someone who I would be nervous for South Carolina to play, and TCU had beat them.
I know. I just think it's all about matchups. And when I look at South Carolina, I'm like, TCU cannot match up with them. And I was right.
You were right.
And this is the game we watched at the 99ers, which was cool.
Very fun and perfect. Malaysia Fulwiley for the Gamecocks scored 20 points. The highlight for me was that Ashlyn Watkins on the Gamecocks dunked the ball.
Yeah, you screamed in my ear.
Yes.
Talk about loud. You almost blew out my eardrum.
I had multiple people at the bar looking at me because I was just so excited. She came down the court and just slammed it down.
And Sedona Prince was coming behind her.
I know.
It wasn't completely uncontested. And she threw it down hard.
Yes. Yeah. I loved it. Loved it. For TCU, Haley Van Lith had 21 points and Sedona Prince struggled with just 6 points, and they have been a dynamic duo. We received a DM this week to talk about Sedona Prince and who she is in women's basketball and some of the controversy that surrounds her. Before we get into talking about Sedona Prince, what we're about to talk about does include allegations of emotional and physical abuse with a partner. So if that is something that you are not wanting to hear, you can always skip towards the look ahead.
Yes.
So we were both talking about this before, and we both had apprehension to talk about it. Why do you think that is for you?
I think for me, it's just like such a personal thing for these individuals, but I struggle because I'm like, when it happens in male athletes and male sports, I'd be pissed if it's not talked about. So I think I just go back and forth of what are the facts? Am I capable of sharing that of what it is and reporting on it? I just know it's a touchy subject overall. So for me, I just struggle with that piece.
Yeah, I feel similar in like I want our podcast to be really honoring and uplifting women and women's sports in general. And I think we would do a disservice if we don't talk about the hard things because hard things are difficult to talk about, but that doesn't mean we should shy away from it. So we're going to do our best here.
Yes. I'll just give some brief background on Sedona Prince because some of you might know the name. You might know certain things about her. She blew up a few years ago when the NCAA tournament was played in the bubble. This was when COVID was taking place and there were no fans at the tournament in 2021. Sedona went viral for posting a video of the conditions of the NCAA tournament for the women and compared it to what she had seen men posting of things like the weight room, whereas the men had this extravagant room with all these weights and all these benches and all these things. And the women's quote unquote weight room was literally one little stack of free weights. And then she showed pictures of the food and it looked like terrible food. And their welcome packages were like these small, meaningless little packages. And the men were being showered with gifts and great food. At the time of this, she was playing at Oregon. And honestly, the positive about this is it brought so much light to the discrepancies of what the men were getting and what the women were getting. As a result of this, a lot of change was made because I think so many people saw it that the NCAA couldn't turn their head to it anymore.
That's exactly right.
At the time, believe it or not, NCAA Tournament for Women was not called or branded March Madness.
Yep. And I would say that she had a pivotal role.
Yes.
Those videos had a pivotal role in changing that.
And now we are branded as March Madness. I think there's still a long way to go and some people respecting that. But it was not branded as March Madness prior. It was just the NCAA Tournament for Women. I think overall the women are getting more of the same that the men are when they go to these tournaments. So yes, those are some really positives, and you might know her through that originally.
Yeah. In addition, she is one of the lead plaintiffs in a lawsuit. The lawsuit is called House versus the NCAA, and it has led to a $2.8 billion settlement from the NCAA. And this lawsuit that Sedona Prince was a plaintiff in, as well as other players, was instrumental to the NCAA changing the rules to allow students to maintain their NIL rights. She has done some really, really important work here to get players money, make sure that there's more equity across men and women's sports. I mean, those are huge. And also, now we get to the other side. And I think it's really important to point out that people have many layers and people can do great things in public and be really shitty in their personal relationships. So let's get into that a little bit. Sedona Prince has had multiple allegations of mistreatment from girlfriends that she has dated. There has been a petition going around with over 200,000 signatures to remove her from the TCU basketball team based on these allegations that were placed against her. So let's get into what these allegations are. So because Sedona Prince has blown up so much, she is very influential on TikTok. She is definitely a TikTok influencer. And in turn, she dates TikTok influencers. Would I want to date someone who's famous on TikTok? No. But hey, you're a TikTok influencer. You want to date other TikTok influencers? Great.
Yep.
Let's get into this. One of her first ex-girlfriends was a TikTok influencer. Her name is Riley LeGlue. She accused Sedona Prince of cheating. So cheating is not abuse. It's shitty behavior, but it's not abuse. Then Sedona Prince went on to date another TikTok influencer. Her name is Olivia Stabile, and she accused Sedona Prince of shoving her to the ground and then threatening to sue Olivia if she came forward and spoke out about it. That is a major allegation. She also claims some emotional abuse. That is big.
Yep.
As a result of that, there were many TikTok stories and updates about it from the ex-girlfriends. This is where the petition comes in. Sedona Prince has told the New York Times that the allegations from Stabile are false and misleading. Sedona Prince also admitted that she wasn't the best partner, but she had never abused anyone before. We, like I said, had a listener ask for our thoughts on this. And yeah, I have some feelings about it, but I do want to just speak more generally about this because I do think it speaks to a larger issue. We've talked about Ashlyn Watkins before at South Carolina. We are in the queer community. I think it doesn't get spoken about that abuse happens in same-sex relationships more than any of us would like to acknowledge and admit. And it can be hard to come forward and talk about it because there isn't an inherent power dynamic because it's two women. And so I think we need to listen to people when they say that someone was abusive to them. I think we need to do an investigation, and I think we need to definitely honor that and look into it and not say not possible.
Yeah, right. Because that is doing damage to the people in the position who are getting abused and experiencing these things. And if they're not feeling validated or heard, like, how are we moving forward? How are we correcting this? How are we stopping future relationships going through this? And I don't know if there's an answer, but if it's not spoken about, we really can't make any changes.
Yeah. And I think we as people who commentate on sports need to talk about it, right? Like, it's not okay for you to ever place your hands on someone. It's not okay for you to ever emotionally abuse someone. And if we ignore it in the sense of that we just want to focus on the positive in women's sports and uplift it, I think that can be really, really problematic because there are so many people and people that we know and that I've seen, especially in college, who were in really abusive relationships and either didn't realize it or did realize it and were too afraid to remove themselves from it, which is totally valid.
Yeah.
I look for patterns in people, right? Are people learning from mistakes that they make? And for me, it's still not clear with Sedona Prince. It's kind of like a wait and see. Is this going to continue to happen? Are people going to continue to come forward? And the pattern is, to me, is the problem. If you screw up so badly and you make a mistake and you learn from it, great. You should face repercussions for those mistakes, especially if those mistakes include physical and verbal abuse. But I have always been a supporter of, can you take care of yourself, take care of the hurt parts of yourself and get better? If the pattern continues is when I start saying this has got to stop, this person needs to leave the league, etc.
Yeah, and they need help, clearly. It needs to be addressed. They need to seek out help because there's a lot of layers there. And yeah, you should not be continuing to play and be on this platform while hurting other people.
For sure. I also know that in my early relationships, they were shitty. And again, I'm making a distinction between shitty and abusive, right? There's a difference between being shitty and there's a difference between being abusive. But I think in my 20s, I was trying to figure out what a healthy relationship looked like. The people around me were trying to figure out what a healthy relationship looked like. I was replicating relationships that I saw that were not healthy. And so I do think there's a lot of learning that happens in your 20s.
For sure.
And again, I'm not making any excuses. And I do think there should be repercussions for abuse. I'm just going to keep saying that.
Yeah.
However, I do think 20s is a rough time.
I mean, 20s and pre-20s, if you're being honest, or being realistic. Now, Sedona Prince has been in college so many years, I've lost count.
This is her 7th year.
So she is indeed in her 20s.
Yes. I guess my point with all of that, we have our eyes on you, just like what I say about Corbin Albert. Like, we're watching what you're doing and we're keeping track, because hate, in Corbin Albert's case, hatefulness, not something I want to be a part of. Emotional, physical abuse, not something that I'm going to support. And I think it's a great thing that fans can hold players accountable.
For sure. Hopefully nothing else comes out about Sedona Prince. And hopefully that means it's not continuing to happen. I just think, to your point, continuing to monitor it is important. And if something else does come out, it's like, okay, what are we doing? Because how many times can someone speak out against this and then nothing is done in return to protect that person who is coming out? So I think it's important to have these conversations. I think it's important to just bring awareness to it and to make it known that it's not okay. And I think if you're in a relationship where you are experiencing this, it is okay to seek help, and that could be really scary. And I hope people are taking care of themselves and doing what they need to do to make sure they are safe.
Yeah. Nobody deserves someone putting their hands on them. No one deserves someone gaslighting them and making them feel horrible, which we don't know what those situations are, but just as a PSA. From a larger perspective, when we look at athletes and their roles, people have many layers, and everyone, I truly believe this, has light and they have darkness. And the second that we put someone on a pedestal and make them everything, like Sedona Prince is not going to be the savior for NCAA basketball. She did some amazing things to bring light to injustices, and she is obviously very human who makes mistakes. So I also think that's important. No one can be your hero because people have many layers to them. And so I think that's important to point out as well. We will be watching. I think that WNBA has higher standards than a lot of the NCAA on what they will tolerate. And so if Sedona Prince wants to go into the WNBA, they're going to be watching as well. And yeah, it's something that we'll continue to track over time and continue to talk about, even though it's uncomfortable to talk about.
Yeah.
Okay, with all that being said, let's get into what we're looking forward to this week. Danielle, what do you have?
So one thing we have not talked about in a while is NCAA volleyball, and it is still happening in full force. The NCAA tournament is live. Games have been going on throughout the weekend. Already the regional round begins Thursday, December 12th. There are a lot of different games throughout the weekend and on Thursday, so check it out. I know I'm excited to watch these.
We've been watching this past week. We've seen an upset or two. We've seen an almost upset or two. So it is a good time to get into college volleyball. Their viewership has been through the roof as well. And we will definitely be spending more time talking about volleyball in the coming weeks.
For sure. What are you looking forward to?
Back to NCAA basketball. We have Iowa versus Iowa State playing this Wednesday, December 11th at 9 p.m. Eastern time on FS1. These are two top 25 teams, in-state rivals. Iowa this past weekend lost to unranked Tennessee. Iowa State has one of my favorite players, Audie Crooks, on the team. Definitely tune in to watch. In addition, on Thursday, December 12th, UConn takes on Notre Dame at Notre Dame.
I'm so pumped for this game.
This is going to be a house divided for you and
it is.
Your dad.
My dad is, I've talked about it before, unbelievably huge UConn fan. I am a huge Notre Dame fan. My sisters fall somewhere in the middle. I'm curious to see which way they go on Thursday.
This will be interesting. Where does their loyalty lie?
So definitely a game to tune into. UConn at the time of recording is still undefeated. We know Notre Dame has 2 losses, so it's going to be a battle.
They play at 7 p.m. Eastern time on ESPN.
That's it for this week. We will see you next week on Women's Sports Weekly. In the meantime, watch women's sports. Rate and subscribe to the pod on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Share the podcast with your friends. Keep sending us topics you want us to cover on Instagram at Women's Sports Weekly Pod. Thanks for joining us.